Hello, welcome, good evening. This is, of course, Novara Live. I am Bastani, and I'm very, very happy to be joined tonight by, I will say, the one and only James Butler. James, how are we?
I'm very well, Aaron. It's really lovely to be here.
It's a lovely summer's night, wonderful guest, and some great stories to talk about on tonight's show. Coming up over the next hour, Donald Trump has deployed the National Guard in Washington in response to what he deems, quote, complete and total lawlessness. A former royal advisor has condemned the proscription of Palestine Action and how the Labour right harasses young members who push back on the party's blind support of Israel. If you'd like to support our work here at Novara Media, you know what to do. Sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Help us build a new media for different politics. And make sure to let us know what you think using the comments right here on YouTube with the chat function, or tweet at us using the hashtag Novara Live. It emerged today that the number of asylum seekers arriving in Britain via dangerous small boat crossings has hit a new milestone. According to official figures, over 50,000 migrants have crossed the Channel since Labour took office 13 months ago, representing an acceleration in the rate of arrivals. You'll probably remember this major plank of Prime Minister Keir Starmer's election pledges.
We have to stop that. And I think the only way to stop that is to smash the gangs that are running this vile trade. They will only stop if we smash the criminal gangs who are running this vile trade. I do not accept that it's impossible to take down the gangs that are running this vile trade. And that's why, in the first few days of government, if we're privileged to come in to serve, we will set up a border security command, a new command with counter-terrorism powers to work on that. I've done it before. I know how it's done. I think it can be done again.
By the way, I've done it before. He's referring to when he was leader of the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, Director of Public Prosecutions. Very, very important point. The CPS basically collapsed under his tenure. That wasn't because of him. It was because it was underfunded. Nobody thinks the CPS is performing well. But he was saying, I was in charge of the CPS. I sorted this thing out. He sorted nothing out. It got worse under his watch. Now I can sort this other thing out. And yet much of the media didn't really ask deeper questions. Some exceptions, like Novara Media, but not many. Those gangs clearly haven't yet been smashed, although the enhanced powers for the UK's Border Command are in the government's Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill, which is still slowly making its way through Parliament. But as the number of people arriving in the UK by small boats increases, so will pressure on Keir Starmer to find a solution to a problem that he told the electorate was a priority. So how dramatic is the increase in these channel crossing figures? And migration figures are usually calculated by the calendar year, while this data concerns the period between July last year and today. But if we compare the number of people arriving by small boats between January and August in previous years, it's clear that the rate is increasing. So far this year, a little under 27,000 people have arrived in the country by small boat. But if you look at 2022, the year with the highest number of arrivals on record, you can see that by August, fewer than 20,000 people had arrived. And it's the same for last year and 2023 as well. So that's at least a 30% increase on those recent years. Whether that rate of arrival holds will depend on lots of different factors: the weather, arrivals into the EU, and of course, the effectiveness of government policy. But some ministers think Keir Starmer's government just hasn't done enough. The Skills Minister and former Home Secretary Jacqui Smith appeared on BBC Breakfast.
It looks like 50,000 migrants have crossed the Channel since Labour came into power, the equivalent of a city the size of Durham. That is an unfortunate record.
Well, I mean, it's not actually a record, but it is it's an unacceptable number of people. It sort of demonstrates the way over the last 6 or 7 years that the criminal gangs have got an absolute foothold in the tragic trafficking of people across the Channel.
That's the Skills Minister. I mean, she's struggling to complete sentences, folks. That's the Skills Minister. If your kids haven't got the skills to make it in the world, of work, don't worry, Jacqui Smith is on the case, even though she can't complete a sentence with any dexterity. The government has signed a new deal with France, that's true, in an attempt to tackle those trafficking gangs. Under the new arrangement, the UK will be able to return people to France who've arrived in this country via small boats in exchange for accepting a similar number of people who've applied to come to the UK from France. Anyone who's previously been returned to France after arriving here by boat will also be excluded from applying to enter the UK legally. The scheme is still in a pilot stage, and the government has been pretty cagey about how many asylum seekers will be affected by it. Jacqui Smith was no different.
Have we got any idea of, in practice, how many numbers that's going to talk about? Because you will know the opposition is saying that the numbers involved will be tiny.
Well, the opposition have got a bit of a cheat, given that their Rwanda project cost £700 million and was never designed for more than 6 people a week anyway. So
how many is your designed for?
Well, we have already detained people who will be able to return. That is one part of the action that we're taking. Alongside that, we've also got more people working for the National Crime Agency, which is why we've been able to make arrests of some of the hideous criminals who are actually profiting from this. And it's why our Borders Bill, which is currently going through Parliament, will also enable there to be even stronger terrorist-style powers to help us to challenge the gangs and the criminals who are profiting from people's distress and who are behind this terrible trade.
All fluff. All fluff. Whatever you have used in this subject, all fluff. No substance, very little by way of policy. Labour's approach to limiting the number of small boat crossings is to combine a deterrent effect for those migrants thinking of using traffickers with a new application route from France. But other parties are still much more keen on the stick than the carrot. A Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, told journalists what she would do.
We need to process people in detention centres. We need to build proper camps where we keep people safe, whether they are migrants or the local communities. But just having people who can stay in a hotel, go out and come as they please, whether or not they're criminals, we have no idea who these people are. I don't think that that's right, and it's gone on long enough.
These camps, are they tents? Are they for buildings? What are these camps?
Well, I remember during COVID when we were able to build Nightingale hospitals very quickly. There are examples of how we've done this before. So that's not where I am an expert at. What we need is the government to actually get the people who are experts to figure out what the solution can look like. It can be done. There's no point just making excuses. And what worries me most is that the government will say they're taking people out of hotels and just put them into into private accommodation, which will be even harder for us to track what's going on. And that's what really worries me now. Labour should not be doing that. They need to build proper places where we can put people coming to our country illegally. But the thing that will fix this problem, what will stop the boats, is a deterrent, which means they don't come here in the first place. And Labour does not have a deterrent plan.
I love the right on this stuff. Not all of the right, but a lot of the right. People like Kemi Badenoch. We can have a foreign policy which displaces tens of millions of people in West Asia and North Africa. Let Israel bomb the shit out of Lebanon and Syria and Yemen and Iran and Iraq and wherever else they want to go. But as long as we have a deterrent, nobody will come. Nobody will come to Europe. Nobody will come to Britain. There is absolutely no acknowledgement of the connection between millions of people being displaced and our foreign policy choices over the last 25 years, which have been awful. And I love Kemi Badenoch. I'm not an expert. You want to be the Prime Minister. I can't offer solutions. I'm not an expert. You want to literally run the country. You kind of need to have the solutions, whatever the problem is. That's literally your job. Labour's failures to so far offer realistic and workable solutions to the problem of dangerous small boat crossings follow hot on the heels of the Tories' dire track record on the same issue. That's left a gap for reform, who are using increasingly robust language while branding asylum seekers as a threat to women and girls. This was Reform MP Sarah Pochin speaking at a Reform for Women conference on Monday.
A Reform government will stop this betrayal of our women and girls. We will deport every illegal immigrant that sets foot on our shores. We will deport all illegal immigrants housed in hotels up and down this country. We will do everything we can to ensure that those dispersed in the HMOs are found and deported. We will deport all foreign national offenders in our prisons, ensuring that when they do get out, they are not free to walk on our streets. We will instruct our police to respond to every inappropriate sexual behaviour call by migrants against our women and girls. We will empower our Immigration Enforcement Division to detain them, to deport them, to raid town centre businesses along the way.
A lot of that is stuff that Labour has recently said, or that the government already does. But the point about HMOs is going to be incredibly popular with a lot of voters. Voters who voted Labour last time, or the Tories, or just didn't even turn up. That is going to be the modus operandi of how Reform try and put clear water on this issue between them and Labour, besides other things like pulling out of the ECHR, etc. Now, on Monday, more than 200 trade unions, refugee organisations and charities sent an open letter to the leaders of the UK's political parties, urging them to tackle what they called, quote, the pernicious and insidious currents of racism in their rhetoric. In the letter, they said this: the responsibility to end the divisive politics, racist rhetoric and demonising language of the past is yours. Only then will you bring unity instead of division and cohesion rather than hate. For those who need our compassion, to be confronted with further torment here in the UK is shocking. But the outpouring of support from communities condemning the hatred is a powerful reminder that these views do not represent the vast majority. Today, we stand in solidarity with those targeted because this is what represents our country. This is who we are. James, this is an issue which really matters to lots of people, both ways. Immigration has been top 3 issues basically for the last 20 years. It's been top 2 issues, I think, pretty consistently for the last year. It's raised itself in salience again since Labour have come into power. And of course, for many people, migration is coterminous with illegal migration. As we saw with that YouGov poll last year, 47% of people think that illegal migration is actually accounts for more people than legal migration into the country. So it's a huge issue. It's salient for lots of people. Lots of people are really misinformed about it. Call me crazy, but maybe Labour should have had an actual plan for some of this, right? Because it doesn't seem like there's a plan.
It doesn't seem like there's a plan. And that's true, I think, across government. It's true of the Labour Party on any number of issues. I think it's certainly the case that this is a pernicious problem. And one of the problems that we encounter is, I think you have to go further back and think where the small boats issue comes from. The small boats issue comes from the last government, actually the Conservative government, having been successful at tackling lorry crossings. So, the standard route for illegal migration until very recently was to come in again, a dangerous way, but less dangerous than a sea crossing on a lorry coming either by ferry or by rail. And that's changed. They've got a lot better at dealing with that. That changed. And so now it happens by boat. That's incredibly dangerous. Stum is right to say that criminal gangs are involved, but there are other factors as well. It's very difficult to tackle this issue, partly because the channel is very long. It's very narrow. There are lots of points of egress and lots of points of entry. It's very hard to police unless you want to do a kind of Dominic Cummings style thing and deploy the Navy to sort of murder migrants in the channel. I don't think that would be as popular as perhaps Dominic Cummings thinks it would be. I mean, we're not there yet. Don't rule it out. The other issue here is that this, really the only way to tackle this is to find some sort of agreement within Europe and with France, in particular on this issue. And the deal with Macron is probably a good first step there. The problem is that probably experts, most experts in the field, although the government is tight-lipped on it, say that that's probably only going to return about 50 people a month at maximum. The government say they're tight-lipped about it because they don't want to tip off criminal gangs so they can incorporate this into their dastardly plans. That's less of a concern than I think the actual politics of the issue. I think they know if they go to the country and say, well, we're going to send back 50 people a month, that's probably not going to cut it. One side of this, I think, that is important and that is sometimes missed in the reporting is that most of the people who arrive here by small boat are successful in their asylum claims. They often take a while, they often take a long time, but you'll see it probably about 5 or 6 paragraphs down the reporting in this in places like The Guardian, that they will take the numbers and say, well, actually, most of these people are successful in their claims. And this is a real problem, I think, in some respects for those of us who are in support of Britain's duties towards asylum seekers, is that this is becoming an increasingly unpopular aspect of British politics. I think it's important for us to stand up and say, actually, this is a duty. This is a political duty. It's part of the international conventions to which we're signed up to. And actually, there are other countries that have it far, far worse. That's probably not an argument that's going to win, but it's an important argument to have on the table and to defend. There are questions of human rights here. Human rights are very unpopular, particularly among the reform crowd. I think you're right to say that they're going to come for the Convention on Human Rights on this issue. This will be the wedge issue on which they do it. I think it was foolish, frankly, of Keir Starmer to come into this discussion and say, I've got the plan. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to destroy, the criminal gangs. We're going to get this under control very, very rapidly. It's a much harder problem than that. It's a very, very difficult one to solve. It's going to take, sadly, a long time. Lastly, on this, just to say, the small boats issue, nonetheless, is hugely, hugely important because it symbolizes all sorts of things for many, many voters. It symbolizes that the government simply doesn't have a grip. It is much, 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 much more visible than illegal entry by lorry. It is much, much, much more visible among those coastal communities where concern about migration is now very, very high. And as you say, it's concern about all migration, not just illegal migration, because it's very, very, very visible. So this is a real problem. It symbolizes, the government's lack of grip. And I'm sorry to say, the government's lack of grip is pretty extensive. It does seem to be running around rather headlessly. But this is a wicked problem. It's a pernicious problem. It's a very, very difficult problem to solve.
I mean, as I understand it, visa overstays account for more undocumented / illegal migration than boat crossings. But like you say, James, I mean, that is not something that people catch on camera. It doesn't look sexy, but it accounts for huge numbers of people. It is a wicked problem. The way you've used wicked there is it's very close to intractable. It's very hard. High incentives to come to this country. Lots of people displaced because of foreign policy. By the way, of all the people to acknowledge that in the last week was Robert Jenrick. Robert Jenrick lashed out at Alistair Campbell, saying you started multiple wars that meant millions of people came to Europe. He's right. Great first step. You're connecting foreign policy and displaced people and refugees coming to Europe and to Britain. Fantastic. Maybe Keir Starmer should have done that too. Would be wise. Because look, people right across the political spectrum, left, right, centre, they all know that, say that. And look, that's not going to make a difference next week or next month, but over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, of course it'll make a difference. You can't say an Iranian that comes to this country as an economic migrant, and by the way, some of them are, right? Why are they economic migrants? Because their country is subject to the most pernicious, harsh economic sanctions on earth. I'd leave. But then you can't call them economic migrants when you allow Israel to bomb their country, do you? Just like, yeah, let Israel bomb Iran, let Iran and Israel go to war. Well, you can't call them economic migrants anymore. They will be fleeing the country because they're displaced by war. There is a connection between foreign policy and these people coming to Europe. There is. We need to mainstream that. Yesterday, US President Donald Trump announced he would be deploying 800 National Guard troops to Washington and temporarily taking over the city's police department in an attempt to deal with, in his words, a rising tide of crime. Here's what the President of the United States had to say.
And we're here for a very serious purpose. Something's out of control, but we're going to put it in control very quickly like we did on the southern border. I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse. This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back. We're taking it back. Under the authorities vested in me as the President of the United States, I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control, and you'll be meeting the people that will be directly involved with that. Very good people, but they're tough, and they know what's happening, and they've done it before. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly. And you people are victims of it, too. You're reporters, and I understand a lot of you tend to be on the liberal side, but you don't want to get mugged and raped and shot and killed. And you all know people and friends of yours that happened. And so you can be anything you want, but you want to have safety in the streets. You want to be able to leave your apartment or your house where you live and feel safe and go into a store to buy a newspaper or buy something.
I love that bit where he said, by the power vested in me, I thought he was going to marry somebody, right? By the power vested in me, I'm now going to override the local authorities. In that same conference, the president also tried to put the DC murder rate in a wider global context.
The murder rate in Washington today is higher than that of Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, some of the places that you hear about as being the worst places on earth, much higher. This is much higher. The number of car thefts has doubled over the past 5 years, and the number of carjackings has more than tripled. Murders in 2023 reached the highest rate probably ever. They say 25 years, but they don't know what that means because it just goes back 25 years. Can't be worse. Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs and homeless people. And we're not going to let it happen anymore. We're not going to take it.
When Trump, you might want to rewind this, when Trump goes drugged-out maniacs, you can just see Pete Hegseth put his head down because I think he's probably trying to stop himself from laughing, right? That level of extemporizing and spontaneity. I mean, this is a dude who's been doing populist rhetoric on TV for 40 years. He knows exactly what buttons to push. That clip was shared by Trump on Truth Social, his social media platform, as was this rather useful graphic. You can see here the murder rate last year per 100,000 people. Washington, D.C., way out in front, over 25,000 murders per 100,000 people. Here's what's fascinating, though. Look who's at the bottom. London. But I thought London had fallen. I thought Europe was going to the dogs. London, Madrid, Paris, we're doing okay, folks. Certainly no Washington, D.C. Trump also posted this graphic with typical understatement on Truth Social. Washington, D.C. will be liberated today. Crime, savagery, filth, and scum will disappear. I will, all caps, make our capital great again. The days of ruthlessly killing or hurting innocent people are over. I quickly fixed the border. 0 illegals in the last 3 months. DC is next. Thank you for your attention to this matter. President DJT. Those are his initials, of course. It's the second time this summer that Trump, a Republican president, has deployed troops to a democratically governed city. A federal trial began on Monday in San Francisco to determine whether the president violated US law by deploying National Guard troops to LA in June without the approval of California Governor Gavin Newsom. And that matters because Trump has signaled other major US cities with Democratic leaders could be next, including Chicago, a city long beset by violent crime. If we need to, we're going to do the same thing in Chicago, which is a disaster. Hopefully, LA is watching. And that's what Trump said. Hundreds of officers and agents from more than a dozen federal agencies have fanned across Washington in recent days, with Attorney General Pam Bondi overseeing the police force, according to Donald Trump. The US Army has detailed how National Guard troops will carry out a number of tasks, including, quote, administrative, logistics, and physical presence in support of law enforcement. It's planned that as many as 200 of the troops will be supporting police officers at any given moment. Washington, D.C. has a population of around 700,000, about the same as Nottingham in the UK, so that's a pretty significant number. But D.C.'s Democrat Mayor Muriel Bowser hit back regarding Trump's original claims of crime besmirching the city's good name. She was eager to highlight that violent crime had hit its lowest level in more than 3 decades last year. Yesterday, she said this.
It is also true that we experienced a crime spike post-COVID, but we worked quickly to put laws in place and tactics that got violent offenders off our streets and gave our police officers more tools, which is why we have seen a huge decrease in crime because of those efforts. We have been able to reverse that 2023 crime spike. This year, crime isn't just down from 2023, it's also down from 2019, before the pandemic, and we're at a 30-year violent crime low. We're not satisfied. We haven't taken our foot off the gas. and we continue to look for ways to make our city safer.
And Mayor Bowser isn't lying. Violent crime, including murders, did soar in 2023, turning Washington into one of America's deadliest cities. However, violent crime dropped 35% in 2024, according to federal data, and has fallen an additional 26% in the first 7 months of this year. That's according to the city police. Responding to questions from the press, Trump offered this piece of folksy wisdom.
He said, you know, my father always used to tell me, I had a wonderful father, very smart, and he used to say, son, when you walk into a restaurant and you see a dirty front door, don't go in, because if the front door is dirty, the kitchen's dirty also. Same thing with the Capitol. If our Capitol's dirty, our whole country is dirty, and they don't respect us. So it's a very good question, actually.
Now, that's a good line, whether or not his father actually said it. Worth remembering, of course, that Fred Trump was arrested at a KKK rally in 1927. And by cleaning up, Trump doesn't just mean tackling crime, but removing the homeless too. That's easier in DC since the federal government owns much of Washington's parkland, meaning the government has legal authority to clear encampments in those areas, just as President Biden did while in office. But the federal government cannot force people to move out of the city because they lack shelter, campaigners have said. The unique status of DC also helps Trump with regard to the National Guard, unlike in states. And remember, DC is not a state, where governors typically hold the power to activate troops. The president has broad authority over the 2,700 members of the DC National Guard. That intervention may only last for 30 days, however, because after that, the president might need congressional approval. But civil rights organizers are eager to point out how Washington, D.C. may become the blueprint for wider interventions across the country. Monica Hopkins, executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union's D.C. chapter, has said this. The president foreshadowed that if these heavy-handed tactics take root here, they will be rolled out to other majority black and brown cities like Chicago, Oakland, and Baltimore across the country. We've seen before how federal control of the DC National Guard and police can lead to abuse, intimidation, and civil rights violations, from military helicopters swooping over peaceful racial justice protesters in 2020 to the unchecked conduct of federal officers who remain shielded from full accountability. Elsewhere, Democratic Governor from Maryland, Wes Moore, said Trump's plan, quote, lacks seriousness and is deeply dangerous. He pointed to a 30-year low crime rate in Baltimore as a reason the administration should consult local leaders rather than antagonize them. In Oakland, Mayor Barbara Lee called Trump's characterization of the city fear-mongering. James, Republicans have been calling for tougher law and order in cities since 1965, and the Watts riots. Nixon did it in 68, Reagan did it in the 80s. Is this time any different?
Yeah, I mean, you're right to say, of course, it's a classic recourse of conservative politicians, whether they be Democrats, frankly, or Republicans. But of course, it's very popular on the Republican side, partly because it targets racially diverse, often very black, inner city districts. I think it is different this time. I think it's fair to say that actually Trump's critics are correct here. As far as I can tell from all the numbers I've seen, crime, violent crime in particular, has been in secular decline in American cities, also true in European cities, true in London as well. So I mean, one of the issues here is the wider issue in American politics that a large proportion of the Trump base has taken joyful leave of consensus reality, and so the question is, how you're able to bridge that divide, how you're able to have any kind of political conversation, indeed, any kind of functional polity with people who don't share, a common grasp on reality, even a sort of, even remotely on the same page. The other side of this, and I think it's important, is that yes, you mentioned, of course, that this started with the deployment of National Guard to LA, to California, a little while ago. DC is different, as you said, and I think it's worth saying that DC has often been the laboratory for kind of authoritarian or illiberal crackdowns by the federal government. Of course, it has demonized things like legalized marijuana. That was, kibosh was put on that, needle exchanges, so any kind of public health oriented measure to deal with the root causes of crime like this. It's also been a laboratory for kind of attacks on public education and things like that. So the question about, DC in particular being a laboratory for you should look at this and think, okay, yes, this is where Trump is going to plan out, what he can get away with, what he can do, how he can use sort of state force, National Guard in particular, for his own ends. On that, it's worth saying, or just worth noting, that of course there is a long tradition in American politics, a conservative tradition about concern about executive overreach, the use of force domestically, whether that be by the army or the sort of semi-militarized or in fact highly militarized police. This is a constant theme of American concern about what the executive might do. That, of course, seems to have completely evaporated under the Trump presidency. Let me just read you a very short quotation from a guy called Robert DeGrazia. This is a quotation, he said this about 50 years ago, 1976. "We're not letting the public in on our era's dirty little secret that those who commit the crime which worries citizens most, violent street crime, are for the most part the products of poverty, unemployment, broken homes, rotten education, drug addiction and alcoholism, and other social and economic ills about which the police can do little. Rather than speaking up, most of us stand silent and let politicians get away with law and order rhetoric that reinforces the mistaken notion that the police, in ever greater numbers and with ever more gadgetry, can alone control crime." He wasn't some left-wing sociologist or hand-wringing journalist. He was the chief of Boston Police.
Very powerful and very important to say, in terms of violent crime, it is at historic lows. In recent days in this country, you've seen people like Fraser Nelson saying, "Oh, there's never been a better time to be alive." I don't agree with that. Lots of things are going wrong in the UK, but things like burglary, things like car radios being stolen for obvious reasons are a lot lower than they were 30 years ago. Fights are much lower, partly because of decline in drinking. Some things have gotten worse, right? I think the basic fabric of the public realm has deteriorated, both physically and in terms of how people behave around one another. That's partly to do with the fact we're all on our phones and a million other things as well. And we should have a conversation about that. I think the public realm should really matter to people on the left and to socialists. But I think it's important to hold both those two things in your mind at the same time, right? Bike theft and phone theft in London is awful. It shouldn't be allowed. Frankly, the Met's basically decriminalised bike theft for my entire life. Steal bikes and get away with it, no problem. That should not be the case. And antisocial behaviour, like people making threats to staff on trains in this country, 95% of TSSA staff report in the last 12 months being subject to physical or verbal threats. That should not be normal, and yet it is. And I think this is the challenge for the left, right? Acknowledging that these big, violent crimes are down on where they were at their peak in the 80s and the 90s, but actually the quality of the public realm has also deteriorated over the same period. I'd love to know what you think. And that's not just me both sidesing it. I think it's genuinely nuanced. I think, London has a very low homicide rate, as we saw from that graphic kindly shared by Donald Trump. That's a good thing. Londoners should be very happy and proud about that. But I think as well at the same time, the way that workers are treated on the underground, for instance, is not good and definitely needs to improve. Let me know what you think. We've got a comment already on our comms doc from Andy Thompson, £5. "I would pay for someone to slip into Trump's speech the phrase, 'I'm making this law today by the power of Grayskull.'" I can imagine it, right? He-Man was a great guy. Yeah, well, I don't know how he'd say something quite captivating and funny. That seems to be his MO. Britain saw the largest mass arrest of protesters since the 1960s on Saturday, when police rounded up over 520 people for peacefully holding up signs that said, quote, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action." Novara's very own Stephen Methven was at London's Parliament Square to witness the event, and he has a new report out on our channel right now. Lucky you. Protesters were peaceful, and a large number of them were older people. This was former British military officer Chris.
"I'm a retired army officer, aged 75, and I've come from North Wales to join in these activities. My own father and his family had to flee from Austria in 1938 after Germany took over and had to leave everything behind. And we are appalled that once again genocide is taking place, and that we, of all people, can see the terrible memories this can raise with us, and we feel it is necessary to take a stand, and that is why I'm here today."
What a guy. What a guy. By the way, ex-commando, I think was a colonel, obviously retired. What a guy. When you're pro-Israel conservative and you see that clip, you think, Christ, these are not the people we want as spokespeople for the cause of Palestinians and to oppose genocide. Chris was amongst the many retired people arrested over the weekend, including former doctors, teachers, and medical workers. And those arrests began not long after the protests began holding up their signs, including this one.
All right, they're really kicking off now.
Is that a terrorist? Come on, man.
Why are you being arrested?
Shame on you! Shame on you! Move out of the way! Get back! Move out of the way!
So, honestly, one of the most shocking things I think I've ever seen, which is a blind man in a wheelchair being dragged off by the police to the vans for holding a sign in Britain in 2025.
Quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. And great work by Stephen. I recommend people watching that whole video, like I say, on YouTube right after this show. Don't leave anytime soon. Other protesters, despite sitting completely peacefully and quietly before their arrests, were handcuffed before being hauled away.
Right behind you, someone is about to be carried away by the police. They're getting closer to you. How do you feel?
It's not nice being arrested, but what's so much scarier is what happens if we don't oppose this. And to me, being inactive, being passive at a time of genocide and while our rights are being stripped away is far scarier than this.
Do you have a message for Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper?
That it's shameful. It's absolutely shameful what they are doing. Keir Starmer, coming from a human rights lawyer background who has defended people who've done similar things, and now trying to prescribe activists who are trying to prevent genocide as terrorists is spineless, and people aren't going to tolerate it, and people are done.
Anything to say?
This ban needs to be lifted. Our government needs to stop this genocide, and we fucking need to fight for a right to protest and for basic human rights. This government is becoming authoritarian.
Hero. Of course, all the people that were arrested over the weekend are heroes and have my utmost respect. And very often you hear this kind of canard, the police don't really want to arrest them. It's often bullshit. The police don't care. The police aren't especially politicized. But I kind of suspect that it would be weird to arrest a blind dude just holding a sign for terror-related offenses. You'd probably think you're not the good guys doing that. Or some retired colonel wearing his regimental tie saying, actually, our support of Israel is a disgrace to this country. It humiliates this country, was his words. Which, by the way, entirely accurate. It humiliates this country. You'd probably have second thoughts if you're a police officer, or at least I'd hope so. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper's prescription of Palestine Action will face a judicial review in November after the group's co-founder Huda Amouri won the right to a legal challenge in the High Court last month. Since then, however, Yvette Cooper has taken to the TV to hint at secret intelligence that she says shows the group is dangerous. Of course, none of that alleged intelligence has been released. And last night, Huda Amouri accused the Home Secretary of making defamatory claims, arguing that her allegations go against the government's own intelligence assessments. In a statement following the mass arrests in Parliament Square, Amouri said this: "It was revealed in court during my ongoing legal challenge to the ban that the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre's JTAC's assessment acknowledges that Palestine Action does not advocate for violence against persons and that the majority of its activities would not be classified as terrorism. Spraying red paint on warplanes is not terrorism. Disrupting Israel's largest weapons manufacturer, Elbit Systems, by trespassing on their sites in Britain is not terrorism. It is the Israeli Defense Forces and all those who arm and enable their war crimes who are the terrorists." Jonathan Porritt is an environmentalist who also served as an advisor to King Charles. He appeared on Newsnight, where he was asked what he thought about Yvette Cooper's comments.
Can I give you some of the Home Secretary's reasons for wanting to ban this organisation? And I'm quoting from Yvette Cooper. "There may be people who are objecting to proscription, who don't know the full nature of this organisation because of court restrictions on reporting while serious prosecutions are underway. But it's really important that no one is in any doubt that this is not a non-violent organisation." And she added there had been clear security assessments and advice ahead of the ban. I mean, is that not good enough for you?
Yes, I'm admittedly somewhat loath to take a rather desperate Home Secretary at face value, it must be said.
Well, do you think she's lying about the security assessments and advice?
Let me play the security assessment back to you. As I mentioned before, the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, which is the government's own advisory body, advised Yvette Cooper that there was no evidence whatsoever that Palestine Action has advocated for violence against people. It has, obviously, in its campaigning work, in its direct action campaigning work, used violence against property. That is very, very different from violence against people.
If I may, Sir Jonathan.
So when Yvette Cooper, if I may, let me just finish. So when Yvette Cooper implies that Palestine Action has done violence to people, we know that the Home Secretary is not, in this case, revealing the whole truth. Why does she not put that truth into the public domain? I think it's really significant tonight that Palestine Action has accused the Home Secretary of defamatory accusations, and we will no doubt hear a lot more about this.
Of course we will. Defamatory accusations are a significant word to use. It means that there is potentially a civil case that can be brought against the Home Secretary. Defamation is a serious offence and should be taken seriously by the Home Secretary. In that interview, Victoria Derbyshire pointed out that the Terrorism Act of 2000 does characterise serious damage to property as terrorism. This was Porritt's reply.
So, as you just said, Victoria, the Act goes back to 2000. It's quite interesting, isn't it, that it's taken 25 years for that particular power in the 2000 Act to be put into practice against the one organisation that is causing this government maximum embarrassment on its complicity in genocide. 25 years have passed without that needing to be brought forward. And let's not have any illusions about this. The government and the police have many powers to use against people taking direct action against property. Criminal damage in this country carries a heavy sanction. So if they wanted to deal with the damage against property, they've got all the powers they need in the existing law. What they did not have was the power to silence Palestine Action, which is what they have now sought to do.
This is a really key point before I come over to you, James. What Palestine Action did at that RAF base is already covered under the law. You can think it's legitimate, illegitimate. You can say, throw the book at them. You can say, no, wear kid gloves, minimal sentence. People that engage in direct action know what they're doing, okay? Especially when it's illegal. They know the potential cost. They're willing to take the risks. It's why they're such brave people. It's why they're such honourable, virtuous people. In my view, you might disagree. It's already covered by the law. And in fact, in terms of damage to military or RAF sites in this particular instance, that is covered by a potential maximum life sentence. Now, that would not be applied here. But that, I think, underscores the significance of the potential offence and how this is not some blind spot or gap in existing legislation. Of course, if you did that, you might have a jury trial. And actually, lots of these, it turns out, despite being terrorism related, are going to magistrates' courts, which is interesting. We'll talk about that, I think, over the rest of this week. So this is covered by the law. Why did you need to prescribe the organisation? And why did you need to use legislation which wasn't even on the statute books until 2000? This idea that it's normal to treat people like this if they write something on a piece of paper or wear a T-shirt in, quote, support of an organisation based in Britain, that is completely without precedent until 2000. The prescription of terror-related organisations in Northern Ireland existed before that date. This, however, is substantially different. When they were debating the Terrorism Act 2000 in Parliament, Hansard shows the ministers responsible for the legislation were saying it will never be used in the way it's now being used by Yvette Cooper. James, do you think Yvette Cooper is familiar with those debates? Do you think she might be on the hook for actually delegitimizing this piece of legislation, which she's obviously very keen and happy to use? Does she realise that actually, as Home Secretary, this is the thing that she'll be remembered for, and it won't be particularly kind or positive?
Yeah, I mean, I think she is now aware that this issue is spinning out of control, and that actually offers us a very easy test for these kind of secret information that she keeps alluding to. Look, if there were a clincher here, if there were some secret bit of information that demonstrates Palestine Action is being funded by Iran, or that it has a sort of secret murder plot somewhere in its archive, it would have been leaked. It would have been leaked to the Telegraph, a week, 2 weeks ago. This is a bit of a political nightmare for the Home Secretary. She doesn't want to go. She really doesn't want it spinning out of control. And it is spinning out of control, which is what happens when you arrest a bunch of rather respectable-looking boomers. That's the other thing here that's very interesting. Actually, boomers get a bad rap, but actually they're the people who, when they stand up for something politically, the government tends to sit up and take notice, as does the press. Third thing here, just a point that's worth making, the property damage clause in the Terrorism Act. You go back to Hansard, as you said, take a look at it. That was instituted because the people who were drafting the bill were worried that if the IRA did the thing which it typically did, which is ring ahead and make sure that a building was evacuated before you blew it to smithereens and nobody died, then they wouldn't be sufficiently covered by the Terrorism Act. That's the kind of serious damage it's referring to, not a bit of red paint on planes.
Yeah, that's just been released by Craig Murray. People can look at the blog with regards to the prescription assessment. There's a comment there. And also, I do recommend going online. If you put Hansard, Palestine Action, you'll probably see some of the debates and the quotes from that stuff as it happened in 2000. It's quite striking. You have at the time, I think the Home Secretary was Jack Straw, overtly saying, look, it will not be used in such a way. And of course, now it's being used in precisely that way by Yvette Cooper. Yvette, we can see it all. It's all online. It's not that hard to find. A quick reminder, you can watch our report on Saturday's mass arrests in Parliament Square on the channel now. The link for that piece of excellent reportage is in the description below. Let's see what you guys have got to say. Joe Billy Bob Abel, £10. One of the stupidest things this government have talked themselves into doing is the prescription of Palestine Action. Completely agree. Hundreds of grannies and priests charged. How many children and grandchildren radicalized? I think if you're the Israel lobby, if you're the Labour right, after this weekend, you're probably starting to have some regrets. Ever heard of Jonathan Greenblatt? He's a former Obama White House official and now heads up the ADL. That's the Anti-Defamation League, a US nonprofit founded in 1913 with the mission of combating anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry. But while the ADL is an American organization, it's also been a prominent supporter of Israel and views the defense of Israel and fight against anti-Semitism in the US as one and the same thing. So what do? Advocacy and policy is one area, with the ADL lobbying lawmakers on civil rights, hate crime legislation, and foreign policy, especially regarding, you guessed it, Israel. They also do research and monitoring, run anti-bias training programs in schools, workplaces, and law enforcement, and they file lawsuits in cases involving hate crimes, religious freedom, and civil rights. As mentioned, the ADL has long monitored extremist groups and political activists. In the 90s, it was embroiled in a domestic spying controversy in San Francisco, where it obtained police files and shared information with organizations, including, allegedly, an Israeli consulate employee. That scandal led to lawsuits and reforms, but it did not prove the ADL was an Israeli intelligence front. But given its eagerness to influence US policy in a pro-Israel direction, it's worth asking, who does the ADL serve? The US or Israel? Washington or Tel Aviv? If it has to choose, who comes first? Israelis or Americans? Well, in a recent interview with JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service channel on YouTube, Greenblatt provided something of an answer. But before we look at that particular clip, here is Greenblatt, along with JBS host Taisha Bader, discussing man of the moment and Democratic nominee for the mayor of New York, Zoran Mamdani.
I want to talk about Zoran Mamdani. He won the Democratic primary for the New York mayoral race. It's just a New York mayoral race, but it has repercussions, I think, across the country. There are several issues that the Jewish community has with him. He supports BDS. He says, yes, Israel has the right to exist. First of all, why is Israel the only country? It's an insane question to ask. Does Israel have a right to exist? We don't ask this question about any other country in the world, but that's another conversation. And he's like, yes, as a Jewish state, he would not answer that question. And then the thing that people are really talking about not condemning this phrase, globalize the intifada, because he says, well, it means different things for different people.
What is going on here? The Jewish community don't like Zoran Mamdani. The Jewish community, he was backed by Brad Lander. Right now, he's polling number one amongst, you guessed it, Jewish people in New York City. But I presume they're not the Jewish community because you don't agree with them. They're not the real Jewish community. They're the fake Jewish community because they don't agree with me. The real one, the authentic ones, they're the ones that agree with everything I say. See how it works? That's community-based politics, folks. You get powerful vested interests and the legitimate voices within that community, the Jewish community, the Iranian community, are the ones that agree with me. The whole point of democratic politics is that we take each person on their own basis. We judge a person by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, certainly not by their communal ties and affiliations. That would be prejudice, by the way. And then she says about Israel having the right to exist. We don't say this about any other country. No country on God's green earth has the right to exist. No country. No country. Stupid talking point. Thousands of historical entities did Assyria have a right to exist? Because guess what? It don't exist no more. Did the Roman Empire have a right to exist? Because guess what? It ain't there. There's a country called Italy instead. Stupid. But there definitely is one country which doesn't have a right to exist. It's called Palestine. No other country do we say this about. Yes, we do. It's the entire basis of the project and program of your party of government in Israel, Likud. That's the basis of Likud. Palestine shouldn't exist. But we never say it about anybody else. So you've got somebody talking about the Jewish community ventriloquizing that, even though, like I say, most New York Jews support Mamdani now, if polls are to be believed. And then she's got this leading question about Israel's right to exist. You're the journalist. Don't ask the leading questions like that. Anyway, here's how Greenblatt replied.
Look, ADL's a 501c3, so we don't get involved in electoral politics. I have questions for every candidate. Doesn't matter how they should affiliate politically. As it relates to this particular person who cut his teeth as a student organizer, for Students for Justice in Palestine. As someone who's worked as a DJ before serving in the state assembly. So as far as I know, he has no relevant private sector, even public sector experience. He hasn't administered anything. And as an assemblyman, this person supported the Not on Our Dime Act, which would prevent nonprofits from raising money for organizations with whose politics he doesn't like because it relates to Israel. So he would prevent, say, Hatzalah from doing fundraisers, or Magen David Adom in New York.
Wow. Because
they, quote unquote, support the occupation, whatever that means.
Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means raising funds for illegal settlements in the West Bank. That's what it means. Illegal under international law. How could you? Wow, really? I don't want supporters of that being able to fundraise in the UK either. Being able to make the most of the tax regime we grant to non-profits and NGOs either. Why would you? They're illegal settlements. Israel right now is ensconced in a war. Every day it's perpetrating war crimes. Why would I want organizations locally to be fundraising for that to be continued? Any sensible person would at least understand why one might have a problem with that. And you've got Greenblatt at the top of that clip saying, this guy is a DJ. He's never administered anything. Guess what he administered? A campaign he won. That's what matters. He administered a campaign where he beat the candidate you prefer. Of course, you can't say that because you don't have political preference, although you clearly do, because you're talking about the guy who's the Democrat nominee for the mayor of New York being a former DJ and having no experience. Greenblatt is pursuing fairness and justice for American Jews. Of course he is. The ADL is not about putting the interests of Israel above those of Americans, Jewish or otherwise, right? Of course. It's an organization based and built in America. Well, have a watch of this and judge for yourself.
The national symbol, let's say, of Hezbollah is a rifle. That's what's on their flag. The national symbol of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is a sword. That's what's on their flag. The national symbol of Israel is the shield. It's the Star of David. The symbol of our people is not a weapon of war. It's an instrument of defense. The thing that most embodies our entire ethos is not harming others. It's, again, creating a better world. This is fundamental to our tradition for thousands of years. And so the idea that our national anthem would be the Hatikva, would be the hope, I should say it's the Israel's national anthem. But I think it speaks to the Jewish longing that whether you're a Jew, I don't know, in New York City or in Nairobi, Kenya, like we all have this shared sense of hope next year in Jerusalem, that the world should be better, that we should be able to return. That is a profound, extraordinary idea.
Who does this guy work for? What is his country? Because he says our multiple times there. I think 4 times, our anthem, our flag, before correcting himself. When he says our, he originally means Israel. Did I say that? I mean the US. I'm an American, of course. I'm an American patriot. Imagine if I did that. I'm a British Iranian. Imagine if I said the Iranian national anthem is our anthem, our symbolism, our values, our Prophet Muhammad. If I talked about our hidden Imam's Imam, Ya Ali, Ya Hussein, our people, next year. Who the fuck is this guy? I'd be crucified by the right-wing media. The same right-wing media that give people like this a free pass. If you're an American Jew, guess what? You're an American. If you're a British Jew, guess what? You're British. And if there is an American Jew who doesn't identify with Israel, by the way, there are many of them. I'm not saying the majority, but there's many of them. Are they not part of the our thing, Mr. Greenblatt? If an American Jew is not a Zionist, and he's referring to Zionist Jews there, next year Israel, then are they not part of the our? Are they part of the enemy as well? James, what do you make of those clips?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably have just one thing to say, but I think it's important. I mean, Greenblatt is not wrong that there is a long, wonderful and important and beautiful and often very moving history of Jewish thought about outsiderness, about the importance of the marginalized and the excluded, the gleaner at the side of the fields. Remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt. This is all a huge, huge part of Jewish and diasporic tradition. And it has long been the critique of anti-Zionist thinkers prior to the state of Israel existing. So we're talking, criticisms within the Jewish community, long before 1948. Associating this, that this is the kind of thing that will burn up in the sort of violent nationalist project that's entailed about, in the establishment of a state like Israel. David Cleon, who's an editor at I think N+1, recently shared some concern that basically Jewish communal institutions find themselves effectively, destroying themselves in an attempt to justify, what is now a kind of militaristic, ethno-nationalist, chauvinist state in the Middle East, and that presents a huge problem, for Jewish communal organizations worldwide. I think that problem is going to be acute and remain acute. And I suppose I think that's a very difficult thing to confront. I would just say on his thing about the Jewish symbol being the Magen David, the shield of David. Sure, but look at the photos. Look at every Israeli politician signing bombs gleefully. Every Israeli celebrity, inscribing these messages of utter contempt and hatred for Palestinians on weapons of war. You want to tell me that's not a national symbol as well? Come on.
And it's also a very recent symbol. The Magen David is not thousands of years old. It's a symbol of 19th century nationalism, which is what modern Zionism is. Again, where did Zionism come from? It's originally contrived by American evangelicals. Christian Zionists are the first Zionists. I talk about all of this with Ilan Pappé. Great interview right here on the YouTube channel here at Novara Media. Over 2 million views. It's really worth watching. It's quite extraordinary. And I mean, look, you might be thinking, Aaron, why do you care about this stuff? Well, like I said, I'm half Iranian. I believe that multiculturalism can work. right? I don't think you have to have monoethnic states for that state to succeed and for people to get on and to enjoy basic rights and civility and to move forward in a spirit of solidarity and comity and togetherness. I don't think you need to do that. And the whole point of Zionism is that Jews in this country, British Jews or French Jews or American Jews, the whole point of Zionism is that they're not really British. They're not really American. Their real country is Israel. Their real country is Israel. Which is, by the way, why the far right love it so much. They love that idea. The two big supporters of the idea of Israel before 1945 were people like Herzl, coming out of a tradition of 19th century nationalism, but also lots of far right racists. They didn't want Jews in Europe. Okay, go over there. Great. Again, talked about at length by Ilan Pappé. It is a massive threat to the idea of multiculturalism. If all of a sudden anybody who's not entirely 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, white British, if they're not all that, then actually secretly belong somewhere else. That's what it means. That's what it means. And it's terribly dangerous. Do I have more in common with a multi-millionaire Los Angeles Iranian? Their parents are plastic surgeons. They vote Republican. They want the downfall of the regime. Do I have more in common with them than a white British person in this country who hasn't got 50 quid in the bank? They're struggling with their kids at home. They're struggling to pay the mortgage. They have to pay the bills. They want a better life for themselves. And they want to look after their parents and make sure that their community is doing okay. Who have I got more in common with? I've got more in common with the second person because of something called class. I believe in class. I believe in a politics that centers on class. Doesn't mean the other stuff is completely unimportant. I think Iranian culture, for me, it's a big deal. But my country is this country. And the people I feel most affinity with are people of a similar class background because they live a similar kind of life. Not because of the color of their skin, or the language they speak, or the food they eat. If you've ever had any dealings with the right of the Labour Party, you'll know that they're amongst the most immoral, bullying, and utterly depraved people in politics. And now the New Statesman has shed light on the depths they're prepared to go to micromanage party members' speech and opinions on the issues that matter most to them. The piece goes into the way that Labour students and other young members are revolting over the party's approach to Gaza, while Labour Party HQ appears to be going out of its way to alienate them even more. This is from that article. The senior figures within the youth movement describe what they see as a profound naivety from the leadership about the scale and seriousness of young members' anger. Instead of recognising students' frustration as part of a wider humanitarian concern, party officials continue to frame the dissent as a fringe issue, an ideological hangover from Corbynism or a potential anti-Semitism liability, a characterisation which Labour HQ firmly denies. Young Labour and Labour student groups have described increased restrictions on their work and communications, speaking of the emotional toll of being, quote, pressured by our members to act on Gaza while feeling abandoned by leadership-affiliated organisations they'd previously supported and, quote, felt welcome in. The party, however, said it has no record of such measures. And many young Labour members have been furious over the government's conditional commitment to recognise a Palestinian state. That's the pledge where Keir Starmer threatened Israel with that recognition unless it stopped doing a genocide in Gaza. And in one case, Labour HQ disaffiliated an entire club over some of its members' dissent from that weak approach to Israel. The New Statesman reports this. Just days after the announcement on Palestinian statehood, some of this frustration came to a head. Warwick Labour Club, long regarded as one of the most active and engaged in the country, publicly backed the resignation of local councillor Grace Lewis, who left the Labour Party in favour of Jeremy Corbyn and Zora Sultana's Your Party. In her resignation letter, Lewis accused Labour of being active participants in the genocide in Gaza. They are, alongside explicit criticism of the party's welfare policy as a continuation of austerity. It is. And a comparison between the treatment of minorities by Labour and Reform. Justified. The party's response was swift. Warwick Labour was formally disaffiliated and quickly rebranded itself as the Warwick Labour Movement. Though no other Labour clubs have followed yet, the rupture sent a warning shot. Now, according to the article, individual MPs on the Labour right have also got involved in some incredibly bizarre and threatening ways. Here's what the article says. Youth committee members describe being strongly cautioned by HQ staff that speaking out on Gaza could damage their reputation and credibility. These warnings were even given to senior, well-established youth figures who have spent a long time working in an unpaid capacity for the party. In one case, a young member's non-Labour employer was contacted by a senior backbench MP who warned the employer to be wary of the student and to, quote, not trust them after they were unable to attend an organised study trip to Israel. This is crazy. Others have allegedly been offered secure jobs after graduation if they toe the party line. Labour strongly refutes this claim. Look, people are rewarded for towing the party line. That happens all the time. Like it or dislike it, that's how politics works. I don't like it. But the idea that an MP would contact the employer of someone because they didn't go on a study trip abroad to Israel should chill the spine of every single person in this country who believes in democracy and a multi-party system. That should chill their spine. And the fact that the MP doing that is a member of the quote-unquote Labour Party, guess what the clue is in the name? They're meant to represent the interests of workers, is nothing short of extraordinary. These people have lost any sense of perspective. They are willing to undermine somebody's ability to earn a living, their ability to maybe get promoted at work, to at least survive in their job, because they didn't go on a trip to Israel. Who's that MP work for? That's the question. Who does that MP work for? If an MP is behaving like that, if a Labour MP is behaving like that, which country do they work for? Which master do they serve? I think that's a pretty important question, frankly. And whether or not you like Novara media, whether or not you like me, maybe you're in the Labour Party, you're a young member, you don't like me, I don't care. That's fine. It's a free country. I would never dream of doing something like that. It's outrageous. No decent person would. Guess what? This is normal in the Labour Party because the Labour right are some of the most indecent people in our politics. The report's author, Hattie Simpson, recently appeared on the New Statesman podcast and talked about precisely that harassment.
One of the ones that really struck me was young members' non-Labour employer, so just their employer, was contacted by a senior backbench MP, you report, who warned the employer to be wary of the student and not to trust them after they weren't able to go on a study trip to Israel. And others have made similar allegations about, being put under such pressure or even being offered incentives like a good job. Yeah. In the party sort of apparatus if they toe the party line on Gaza. Can you tell us a bit about, the feeling among the student movement about how they're treated by Labour HQ in this way?
I think there's a real and pervasive fear. I mean, even from my own perspective, I've worked quite closely with the Labour Party in the past. Even myself writing this article, I was quite aware of the fact this is going to hurt me, hurt my career and things like that. And I am still at university. Mm-hmm. And everyone is saying the same thing. Everyone is, even from a practical point of how hard it is to get a job nowadays, particularly in politics, all it matters is who knows you, what they think of you. And so you can't risk stepping out of line. And it's been made very, very clear to lots of students that if you talk about this, you are stepping out of line. And so there's a real, as I say, it's really pervasive, I think, even the fact that, lots of young members were talking to me about that. They don't even feel they can have private conversations with their own friends where, there's no sort of Labour HQ present or anything like that. They still feel scared of talking out because the real risk that there is there for them.
This sounds like the Stasi. This sounds like East Germany before 1989. Great childcare, but when it came to open and frank conversations about foreign policy or domestic affairs, you might be in trouble. That's what it sounds like. Even when they're talking privately to friends, they kind of don't want to open up just in case maybe they get grassed up. James, I remember under Jeremy Corbyn, Paul Mason, one journalist, would often talk about a Stalinist turn in the party. But in terms of a closure of debate, in any meaningful sense, I mean, this does seem utterly extraordinary and without precedent, should be said.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the internal culture of the Labour Party is oligarchical. And I think that's really important because it has a number of consequences. I mean, there's a sociological background to this claim. The nerdier viewers will be familiar with Robert Mitchell's famous iron law of oligarchy, which is that any internal bureaucracy in a political party will tend towards oligarchy. His study was left-wing parties in Germany. And it's true. The bureaucracy develops in a way that reproduces itself. It becomes interested in reproducing itself, and it does so via some pretty aggressive means. in the Labour Party, that turns out to be a sort of training in sycophancy. So one of the things that's happening here is that they're looking among this kind of cohort of students who will eventually, some of them eventually replace them in Parliament and in the party, and they're looking at them as their potential replacement. So they need to be formed in this kind of culture of deference, of obedience, of gossip mongering, of power plays. And that's the internal culture of the Labour Party. It's a very, 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 very unpleasant place. Not a very democratic place either. It's a thing that I think anyone coming out of the Labour Party into a new political formation will have to unlearn the habit of anti-democratic power plays. But the problem here is that it produces a mismatch, right? Like it produces, it produces people who make it to the top of the pile, perhaps, make it to be politicians. And they've learned not to think anything, not to say anything, not to do anything, simply to obey and simply to fail to think for themselves in any way. And that's no longer a way of being successful in politics. It might once have been. I think that's going to look increasingly out of time. I suppose the last thing to say here on the Labour Party, yes, thuggish and intimidatory behaviour on part of the Labour right, particularly on the matter of Israel, a classic thing that gets talked about in democratic circles in the United States. Progressive except for Palestine. Well, Labour right, progressive except for quite a lot of other things, but Palestine is really one of them. But look, there's serious disquiet here. There's intergenerational disquiet, and there's major difficulty, I think, ahead for most institutions which have, at the top, largely pro-Israel or sort of Zionist sympathies, and deep disquiet among a younger generation. That's going to really, I think, provoke some serious realignment, not just in British politics, but in British culture, and not just Britain.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think this story, for me, yes, this is a perennial story. It's a very old story about Labour Party gangsterism. As I've said so many times, the worst people in British politics are the Labour right. Because at least the Tories, they want to do politics because they believe in tradition, or they believe in monarchy, or they just believe in the private sector, and they think actually the private sector and market economics is better for everybody. These guys just believe in power. And I know that also exists a little bit in the Tory party as well. It kind of exists anywhere in politics. That is literally the only MO of the Labour right. That is the only MO. There is nothing else. It is just power. And that devolves inevitably into gangsterism. And I think this story really shows you how bad Starmer's government is, Starmer's party is, but also how low it's going to fall. Because the people that are still left in Labour students, it's gone from 100,000, or young people in Labour, I should say, Labour students, young Labour, but younger members, has fallen from 100,000 people to 30,000. So left-wingers have left. Okay, for the most part, there's some left, but for the most part, left-wingers have left. These are people that supported Starmer. These are people that were critical of Gaza. And now they're saying they can't have frank and open conversations with their friends. They're saying, well, we have people saying to us, why on earth can't you say or do X, Y, Z when it comes to trying to stop a genocide? You say you care about politics, you're involved in the Labour Party, it's the party of government. Surely you do that precisely so you can have influence on certain outcomes. Why else would you bother? Otherwise, it's just a complete waste of your time, right? And that's making these young people think. Because it's not to have influence on outcomes. It is just to be cheerleaders. It is just to have the old pom-poms out. But when that's pom-poms for genocide and thousands of children being mutilated, guess what? Young people aren't that interested. And I think this story really underscores the fact that Labour are heading for their worst ever election result in modern history, I think. In the next general election, I think. I think they're going to get the teens, personally. Things can change. 4 years left. Keir Starmer might go. Somebody else might come in, stabilise things, steady the ship. I think they'll be very lucky to get the 24% that the Tories got in last year's general election. Very lucky. I don't think that will happen. I think they'll get below 20%. I think the Tories will too. James, thanks for joining me on tonight's show.
Just a delight, a real delight.
I couldn't agree more. And thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.